Paying off your house early might be the biggest financial mistake of your life, and nobody tells you why. You're 45 years old. It's a Tuesday, not a dramatic day, not a holiday, just an ordinary weekday with ordinary light coming through ordinary windows. You sit down at your kitchen table with a glass of wine and your checkbook like you're performing a small private ceremony. You write a check for $42,000. It's not bonus money. It's not fun money. It's the last of your savings, the scraped up remains of your emergency fund, and the final chunk of a small inheritance that you promised yourself you'd use wisely. But when you sign your name, it feels powerful, clean, responsible, like you're doing something your future self will thank you for. You slip it into an envelope, seal it, drop it in the mail, and take a deep breath that feels like exhaling an entire decade. You did it. 6 months later, you're in a completely different movie. You lose your job, the economy turns, your industry gets gutted. Suddenly, the thing you assumed was stable, your paycheck, vanishes. Your income drops to zero. You open your bank account and it's basically empty because you took the one thing that could move, your liquidity, and you sent it straight into the one place it can't easily come back from, your house. You still need groceries. You still need to keep the lights on. You still need to repair the car when the transmission starts slipping, because life doesn't pause for financial milestones. Bills don't care about your sense of accomplishment. The electric company doesn't accept pride as payment. And then you look around. You see the walls, the floors, the roof. You know the math. There's $500,000 in equity trapped in here. You can feel it like a safety net you can't reach, but you can't eat drywall. You can't pay the mechanic with a brick. So you do what any rational person would do. You go to the bank and ask for a home equity line of credit. You're not asking for charity. You're asking to borrow against your own asset. And they don't negotiate. They don't care about the deed. They don't care about your story. They care about one thing: income. No job, no loan. You are sitting on a pile of gold and you are starving to death. That right there is the liquidity trap. It's what happens when you confuse being debt-free with being safe. You obsess over the emotional badge of "I owe nothing," and you end up mathematically guaranteeing your fragility. You traded flexible cash for an illiquid trophy. You traded options for a feeling. And if you're not careful, that feeling can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime. My name is Rowan, and I spend way too much time thinking about the emotional stories we inherit. Stories that sound responsible, feel comforting, and quietly sabotage our financial lives.
If you're currently sending an extra $200, $500, $1,000 a month to your mortgage principal because you want that rush of freedom, or if you have a low interest rate but you still feel guilty carrying debt, then you're exactly who this is for. Because today we're going to take one of the most sacred beliefs in personal finance and put it on the operating table. We're going to talk about why paying off your mortgage early is often not a smart move, but a costly one. We're going to talk about debt equity, inflation arbitrage, opportunity cost, and why, for a disciplined person with a low-rate fixed mortgage, keeping that loan might actually be the safest thing you can do. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The paid off as fast as possible movement is driven by emotion, not math. The emotion makes sense. Most of us were raised by parents or grandparents who lived through different financial physics. In eras when interest rates were double digits, debt wasn't a mild inconvenience. Debt was a predator. If your mortgage was 14%, paying it off wasn't a lifestyle preference. It was survival. It was a guaranteed 14% return, risk-free, tax-free, brain-dead simple. In that world, rushing to zero was rational. But we do not live in that world. If you're sitting on a mortgage at 3%, 4%, even 5%, and you're aggressively paying it down, what you're actually doing is choosing to invest your money at exactly your mortgage rate. That's the return, the interest you don't pay. It sounds impressive when you frame it as, I'm eliminating debt, but mathematically, it's a fixed yield. And now ask yourself a question that cuts through all the emotion. If a bank offered you a savings account paying 4%, but your money would be locked up for years, and if you wanted it back, you'd have to apply, qualify, maybe pay fees, maybe wait weeks, maybe be told no, would you open that account? You would call it a terrible deal. You'd say, I can get similar yield in a money market and still have access. I can buy treasuries. I can build a diversified portfolio. I can invest in assets that historically return more than that over long periods. You demand flexibility. You demand optionality. But when that same locked up 4% return is disguised as paying off your mortgage, people applaud it because the word debt makes them uncomfortable, because being debt-free feels like virtue. That discomfort has a price. It's a fear tax, and most people pay it without realizing they're paying it. Now let's talk about the concept that runs the entire financial system: arbitrage. Arbitrage is the spread. It's the gap between what money costs you and what money earns you. It's how banks make money. They borrow cheap and lend expensive. They borrow from you through a savings account paying a tiny rate, and they lend to someone else through a mortgage at a higher higher rate, and they keep the difference. That difference funds skyscrapers, bonuses, and entire empires. You can do the same thing in reverse. If you can borrow long-term money at a fixed, relatively low rate, and you can invest your own cash at a higher long-term rate, the spread is profit, not maybe profit, not fancy theory. That spread over decades is a wealth engine. Let's make it concrete. Say you have $100,000 of extra cash. You can do one of two things. You can pay down $100,000 of your 4% mortgage, saving about $4,000 a year in interest, or you can invest that same $100,000 in a diversified market portfolio that historically over long periods has returned closer to 8 to 10%. At 8%, that's $8,000 a year. Same money, two outcomes. The difference, $4,000 a year, doesn't just sit there like a one-time bonus. It compounds, it grows, it multiplies. Over 30 years, it becomes a massive number. Not because you worked harder, but because you allowed math to keep working for you instead of shutting it down.
When you pay off the mortgage early, you're not just reducing risk. You're killing the spread. You're taking your most productive employee, leverage, and firing it. You're choosing a lower yield use of capital because the emotional relief feels valuable. And I get it. Your next thought is probably, okay, but debt is dangerous. What if the market crashes? So let's fix the definition of risk, because this is where most people get trapped. Most people define risk as owing money, but the true risk, the one that ruins lives, is not having access to money when you need it. When you send extra principal to the bank, that money doesn't sit in a safe, accessible vault under your control. It disappears into equity. Equity is not cash. Equity doesn't pay bills. Equity doesn't create optionality. Equity just sits there, silent, until you sell the home or borrow against it. And borrowing against it is easiest when you least need it, and hardest when you're desperate. Banks lend to people who don't need loans. If you lose your job, if your credit score drops, if the housing market cools, if lending tightens, that equity becomes trapped. You become house rich and cash poor. You have a giant asset and no oxygen. Compare that to someone who kept the mortgage and invested the extra money instead. If they lose their job, they can sell a portion of their portfolio. They can pay the mortgage for months or years out of their liquid assets. They can cover groceries and insurance and taxes. They have runway. They have choices. They have time. Who is safer? The person with a paid-off house and no liquidity, or the person with a mortgage and a large, accessible pile of cash? It's the person with cash every time. A route without liquidity is shelter with handcuffs, because even when your mortgage is gone, you still owe property taxes. You still owe insurance. You still owe maintenance. And if you can't pay those, the house isn't some untouchable fortress. Governments can take it for unpaid taxes. Disasters can bankrupt you without insurance. A paid-off house doesn't guarantee safety. It guarantees one thing. You own a physical structure. Safety comes from liquidity. Liquidity buys time. Liquidity buys options. Liquidity buys resilience. Now let's introduce the most overlooked advantage in the entire mortgage conversation: inflation. Inflation is brutal for people who save in cash and think they're being conservative. But inflation is a gift to the person who holds long-term fixed-rate debt. A 30-year fixed mortgage is you making a deal with time. Your principal and interest payment is locked. It doesn't rise with inflation. Your payment stays the same number of dollars while the value of a dollar erodes year after year. So today, that $2,000 payment might feel heavy. It might feel like a big chunk of your income. But in 15 or 20 years, if inflation continues at even modest rates, that same $2,000 will feel dramatically lighter because your income will likely be higher and the purchasing power of that payment will be lower. You are paying the loan back with cheaper dollars. The bank lends you valuable dollars today and receives less valuable dollars later. That's the hidden advantage of fixed-rate debt. Inflation eats the real value of what you owe automatically without you doing anything. When you pay off the mortgage early, you cancel that advantage. You rush to repay the bank with today's expensive dollars instead of tomorrow's discounted dollars. You hand them the favor. You hand them the gift. Now let's talk about the cost you never see: opportunity cost. This is the invisible fortune that disappears the moment you choose to accelerate your payoff. Imagine your mortgage payment is $2,000 and you decide to pay an extra $1,000 per month toward principal so you can kill the loan in 15 years instead of 30. It feels virtuous. It feels disciplined. It feels like you're winning. But run the alternative timeline. If you invested that same $1,000 per month into a low-cost, diversified index fund for 15 years, you would likely end up with a serious portfolio, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then something important happens at year 15 in the investing timeline. You don't stop because you still have the mortgage, yes, but you also still have the habit. You keep investing that same $1,000 per month for another 15 years. And that second 15 years is when compounding starts to look like magic. By year 30, the investing timeline can produce a portfolio that is dramatically larger than what the early payoff produced. Even though the house appreciates in both timelines, the home grows in value regardless of whether you rushed principal payments. The appreciation doesn't require early payoff, but the portfolio only exists in the investing timeline. That gap can be $1 million or more over a full mortgage term, depending on returns and consistency. So what did you really buy when you rushed to be mortgage-free? You bought a feeling, peace of mind. And peace of mind is not worthless, but it can be extremely expensive, especially when you don't realize what you're paying for it. And here's the psychological trap that makes this even worse. People tell themselves, once the mortgage is gone, then I'll invest. But human behavior doesn't work like spreadsheets. When a major payment disappears, most people don't automatically redirect every dollar into investments. The money leaks into lifestyle, nicer car, better vacations, more eating out, home upgrades, subscriptions. The surplus gets absorbed because life expands to fill available cash. That's Parkinson's law. Spending rises to meet income and available room. So the fantasy that the mortgage payoff will unlock investing is often just that, a fantasy. In many cases, keeping the mortgage and investing deliberately is the only way people actually build serious wealth, because it forces a structure, it forces a plan, it forces discipline to be intentional instead of accidental. And yes, there's also a reality most people don't talk about. Concentrated, obvious equity can make you look wealthier on paper in a way that attracts problems. When your wealth is concentrated in one visible asset, it's easy to identify. When you keep more of your wealth diversified and liquid, you often have more flexibility, more control, and in many cases, you appear less like a single juicy target. Now, some people bring up taxes, and taxes used to be a bigger part of the story. The mortgage interest deduction used to be a major incentive for a lot of homeowners. Today, with the higher standard deduction, many people don't itemize, so the deduction doesn't matter as much for the average homeowner. But here's the point. You don't need the tax argument for the strategy to work. Even if you get zero tax benefit, the combination of liquidity, arbitrage, and inflation can still make holding a low-rate fixed mortgage the superior move for a disciplined person. And now we arrive at the emotional counterpunch. What if the market is flat for 10 years? What if there's a crash? What if I retire and I can't make the payment? Those fears are not stupid. They're human. They matter. But they're not solved by sending money into a wall. They're solved by building a buffer you control. In the investing scenario, you're not just taking risk. You're building an asset base alongside your liability. That asset base becomes your insurance policy. If markets are flat, you still own the shares. If markets drop, you can adjust withdrawals. You can keep cash reserves. You can create a ladder of safer assets as you approach retirement. You can plan. And if you ever want to be debt-free in a way that actually means something, here's the adult version of that goal. Have enough assets that the debt no longer controls you. If you have $500,000 invested and it's producing enough income or growth that your mortgage payment is a rounding error, you are functionally free. You're debt-free in reality because your assets cover the liability, but you still control the principal. You still control the options. Handing the principal to the bank eliminates options. It reduces your flexibility. It makes you dependent on future borrowing ability if you ever need liquidity. And that borrowing ability is least available when life is hardest. So when does paying off a mortgage early make sense? It makes sense when the math changes. If your mortgage rate is truly high, 8-9% or more, and you cannot reasonably earn better risk-adjusted returns elsewhere, then paying it down is a guaranteed return that can be hard to beat. That's a different world. In that world, the payoff can be rational. It also makes sense if you know yourself, and you know you will not invest the difference. If you'll spend it, if the money will vanish into lifestyle and impulse, then paying down the mortgage becomes a forced savings mechanism. Not optimal, but better than nothing. But if you are disciplined, if you're the kind of person watching a channel like this because you want to optimize, then a low-rate fixed mortgage is not a moral failure. It's a financial instrument. It's cheap, long-term money. It's leverage with a fixed cost. It's something the wealthy actively try to secure because it's hard to find and incredibly useful over decades. This requires an identity shift. You have to stop treating debt like a sin and start treating it like a tool. Corporations use debt. Governments use debt. The wealthy use debt. Not because they're reckless, but because they understand what it buys: liquidity, flexibility, and amplification. The middle class is taught to worship zero, to rush to debt-free as if it's the finish line. But zero can be a dangerous place. Zero leverage means you've removed a major wealth accelerator. Zero liquidity means you've removed your ability to adapt. And zero options is what turns normal setbacks into catastrophes. So here's the actionable step, the one that actually changes your future without requiring a dramatic life overhaul. Stop paying extra principal just to chase the feeling. Take the extra $200, $500, $1,000 you're currently sending to your mortgage company and reroute it. Open a separate brokerage account and name it something that makes the emotional part of your brain cooperate. Call it the Freedom Fund. Call it the Runway account. Call it the Sleep Well portfolio. Then automate it. Same amount, same schedule. No willpower required. Let that money build. Let it grow. Let it become liquid strength. And in 10 years, do the comparison. Look at what you have in that account versus the interest you would have saved by accelerating your mortgage payoff. You won't need me to convince you anymore. The numbers will do it for you. More importantly, if you have an emergency tomorrow, that account gives you choices. You can access it. You can sell part of it. You can cover expenses. You can keep your life intact. But you cannot call your lender and ask for last month's extra principal payment back. That money is gone. It's trapped. It's silent. It's dead equity until you can unlock it. And you might not be able to unlock it when you need it most. We need to stop optimizing for sleeping well at night based on outdated debt shame and start optimizing for sleeping well at night because we've built a real fortress: liquidity, diversification, and time. A paid-off house is a trophy you can point to. A liquid investment portfolio is an army that protects you. I'd rather have the army. If this made you pause that extra principal payment, share it with someone who's obsessed with being debt-free but has no runway. Help them see the math, not the myth. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.